All right. What is up, everybody? It is Dom, the creator, host, all the above behind Survivor Grand Rapids and Survivor Dearborn. And we are here tuning in to our first episode recap of Survivor Grand Rapids Season 6, Bad Blood. And today we have a heck of a panel for you. We are bringing in some alumni from past seasons, and we have a little bit of a boys' night going on. Last week, you got me, Grace, and Claire. This week, we're bringing in the boys. So without further ado, let's see who will be joining me. First things first, we got to bring in our Season 1 winner and Season 4 hero, Noah Welker. Noah, how's it going?
Doing pretty well. Glad to be back. It's been a minute.
It has been a minute. Noah, you also helped us behind the scenes, both production side of things, heading into Bad Blood. You have some stake in the game with Carrie being in on the cast, and you were part of our camera crew. So we'll dive into more of that as we cover the episode. Next up, we are bringing in live from Detroit, Michigan, Liam the Butcher from Survivor Grand Rapids Fresh Meat. Liam, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I haven't been back on this panel since I went out last season, so I'm glad to be back.
Yeah, you are a seasoned vet at this point, so we're looking forward to getting your insight into this. And speaking of seasoned vets, we are bringing in robbed juror Mark from season 5, Fresh Meat. Mark, how are you doing today?
Doing well. Beat up on Michigan last night on College Football 25, and you can't do any better than that, about 120-3. So it was a good night.
Sounds like a good night. The only thing better than that would probably be Survivor Wednesday, which we are coming in live tomorrow for episode 2. It sounds like it was a pretty good episode for episode 1. I hope you all enjoyed it. Yeah. All right.
It was phenomenal.
Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. Well, let's just dive right into it. It was an hour and a half of filming, and season 6 was no joke. We kind of started off the game with a lot of backstory, filling in the audience with the connections. That was kind of our big thing heading into this season, because with Survivor Dearborn, with Survivor Grand Rapids, there's inevitably going to be a connection, whether relationships or friendships. That all kind of plays a part into the game. And so this season specifically for Bad Blood, we wanted to test where those were at, but also draw the lines very clearly from the jump. So starting off the bat, Liam, so we come into we do the big drone over shots of everything, and you see the partners walking in, and they find out that they will be playing in pairs. And so that was kind of a big reveal. You have partners that were siblings, significant others, roommates, and then you have engineers and Grand Rapids locals. So coming in as somebody who just got off of Fresh Meat, what would your reaction be to finding out that you had a partner in the game?
That'd have been great. That'd have been great last season, because especially when I went out was the first one of the merge. So I was just like, okay, cool. Who do you partner up with, right? So it kind of works as an advantage going into the merge, but at the same time, I feel like it can also work as a disadvantage. So let's just say more than half of the partners are out on each side, and you have 2 teams left, and they're like, hey, I've got my partner still. I feel like they might be targeted pretty early on, right, when it comes to the merge. But I think that would have been a great advantage to have last season.
It's an interesting advantage to have, especially with how things kind of has shaken out the first episode. So you have like these relationships that are being kind of headlined as like, the close-knit ones. And then you have the ones that are a little bit more subtle, might not even known each other going into the game. But then right off the bat, they are forced to vote somebody out of the game. So that was a big twist that we had this season to kind of just immediately put them in game mode. That was our big intention to do that. Mark, What were your thoughts on both tribes' decisions to vote off Zoe from Vengeance and then Chase off of Vendetta?
It was very interesting how I was out of the picture, so I just saw who came to me. And it was interesting to see how they came to their conclusions. And I think this season, as much as the relationships matter, I think we had a lot of people coming in as a threat, and the added aspect of having a partnership added to your threat level as well, where it's not just like one person has a couple of friends in the other tribe. You might have somebody you're dating over there. So it kind of surprised me, not to spoil anything, but to not see both returners coming back. But it was interesting how they kind of came to their own conclusion of what does a threat really look like from the start of the game, and how widely distributed the votes went on one tribe compared to another.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting to edit that as well. We had a lot of different reasonings, and I know we weren't able to show most of them. Magingo kind of comes off right off the bat saying that she voted for Zoe because she was the returner, and that was, everybody else needed a fair shot. And then what wasn't seen was a couple other strategic moves. I want to point out Josh specifically. Josh voted for Sam, on Vengeance. And his reasoning behind that was he was just kind of burning a vote. He didn't really want to stir the pot early for that. Noah, coming in and you're forced to make that decision, what kind of route of strategy would you go with a tribe that you might have never met before?
Yeah, I think it's tough to reintegrate after exile, and I think we saw that with Chase later on in the episode. So my strategy going in would have been someone who I didn't kind of gel with immediately, or I think they might be a threat. I know that there could be something at exile, whether it's an advantage, but I think having it in my hands, I would choose to put someone under the pressure, because then they have to balance coming back, like handling, how do they tell the rest of the tribe if there was an advantage. There's a lot of pressure on that. So if they can play it well, that's great, but it's hard to do that for sure.
Yeah. And something that I kind of wanted to mention, and I thought about bringing up on the podcast, was Day Zero. And Day Zero was something that wasn't shown in the footage at all, but it was something that we intentionally did this season. We invited everybody to come out to the farm the day before, and part of that was so that we had everybody ready to go for production bright and early the next morning, and we could wrap up some of that pre-production stuff. But we also wanted to kind of break down those awkward barriers so that when everybody was hitting the mat, they weren't, kind of complete strangers. And I think we saw that kind of dynamic right off the bat. They spent a night together already. They weren't allowed to talk game, but they were, it was like a nice little social. It was the calm before the storm, so to speak. Everybody was eyeing each other up. Everybody was, having those conversations. So it was something a little bit unique coming into the game. And I'm not sure if it completely affects the game, but it definitely loosened everybody up. And I guess, Liam, for somebody who came in again last season from Detroit, you came in not knowing a lick about Survivor, and you came out you came in almost in the minority. You were coming into Grand Rapids territory. As somebody that is from out of town playing the game, how important is it to kind of establish those relationships with the other people that are playing the game, or also just like the locals? How do you navigate those conversations right off the bat in Survivor Grand Rapids specifically?
It's a good question. I mean, I feel like we kind of saw it with Chase, right? Noah, what you said, those people going to exile, they have a tough time kind of coming back into the game after exile, right? And so I think it's just about you got to be as out there to kind of get those connections. And even if you are a quiet person, I feel like it makes it even harder trying to come back from exile as well, right? So in order for you to kind of start at Day Zero and be as outgoing and establish those connections are huge. But some people might not be the best at doing it right from the get-go. It might be a challenge for them. So
yeah, it's a tough spot to be in. And I feel like after everything that was said and done with putting each other into partners and Zoe and Chase being sent to Exile Island, the only really else thing that kind of happened in the beginning was that reward challenge. And the reward challenge was kind of gnarly on our side. I'm sure Noah and Mark, or actually you both might have been at Exile for that one.
Yeah,
that one was gnarly. That was edited down to about 10 minutes. That challenge took about 45 minutes to do. It was pretty crazy. We had constant, for being in the middle of nowhere, for being in the back roads of Grand Rapids, there seemed to be a car coming down the street every 5 minutes. So reset the challenge, all the time. You had John Urbanic up at the top of the hill waving at us that a truck was coming. So that was.
Is it not filmed on an island? Like, did I miss something?
It's filmed in the middle of nowhere by some train tracks and apparently some dirt roads that get a lot of busy traffic. And the contestants really put their all on the line. And so wanted to provide some insight on that because on the screen, like it kind of just looks like they're running through the motions. And I tried to edit it down as much as possible because I promise you did not want to see the ball missing and rolling down the hill and then having to run back and then missing over and over again. We actually had 2 people throw up, I think, from that challenge just based on like dehydration. I know Brooklyn was one of them, and I think somebody else threw up back at camp. So that was a great start to the day one. So provided that little insight for our audience.
It was just scorching hot that day too. Like Exile, there was no breeze. We're just like out in the middle of a cornfield. And it's like, I imagine that challenge was the same thing where it's like 90, 95 degrees. You're standing in the sun for 45 minutes and like trying to be engaged. So it's definitely taxing, especially as a reward challenge, not even as an immunity challenge, right?
Yeah. John from Vendetta said that he almost died in that challenge. But, John, you made it up that hill pretty solid, so still pretty good. But, yeah, it was a first challenge, and we head back to camp. We see the Vengeance Tribe celebrating their win kind of right off the bat, pinning their signs. We get introduced to a lot of those contestants over there. Magingo kind of explains her plan a little bit more in depth of why she decided to vote for Zoe. And then it's kind of like an ominous feeling up until you see Sam rip the banana, give a description of Tyler, and we see Tyler and Josh lock in and start to formulate a bond based on Grand Rapids. So nobody from here on this panel is from Grand Rapids, but all of you like kind of see that POV of coming into play in this city. Mark, seeing that interaction happen like as strongly as possible, it kind of resonated with me with something that you did last season of just kind of like coming out swinging. We won the first challenge, but I don't care. I'm going to get these alliances forged right away. Do you think that was something out of your playbook, and how effective do you think Tyler executed that?
He went to good people, and I think that was a good difference between his game and mine, is that like if you put your faith in the people that you know are of similar beliefs and want similar paths in the game, you can set yourself up for success. And I think Tyler came in because I think one of the big things about Survivor is at the very beginning, kind of like we'll talk about it later, but the Green Tribe is like there's almost no reason to vote anyone out. You don't want to be the person the flashiest. You don't want to be the person the most outspoken. At the beginning of the game, you kind of want to like lay low. And then he decides to come out all bold, wearing his fedora, full jacket. He's snazzing it up. So I respect what he did, and I think he did it in a very tasteful way to set himself up for the end game too. So I respect a lot of what he did in episode 1.
Nice, setting himself up for the end game in episode 1. That's pretty big brain move of Tyler. So it was a good showing for me to be able to see that kind of fight right off the bat, not just from Tyler but also from Josh. Meanwhile, over at the Vendetta Tribe, I feel like they're just kind of struggling to stay alive with their flag keep falling. That was something that was a theme over there. And you immediately start to see a divide almost just in a variety of people's narration. So Drew was pointing out how Adrian and I believe it was Grace that voted for him. And then meanwhile, Adrian was pointing out Hannah and Drew as kind of the leaders. So it's kind of like a rocky start, like right off the bat of seeing this uneasiness around the camp. So I guess, Noah, what was your interpretation watching that happen as somebody who started off both of his seasons on the losing tribe of the first challenge?
Yeah, it did remind me of Green Tribe, where it's like slowly everyone just like descends on each other and just like cannibalizes each other. So it's tough when that is from the outset. And part of it's like with Exile, that's the point of it, is to get a little bit of that action earlier in the game. But it's if you have, like Mark was saying, like strong alliances and strong people you can rely on, it makes the early game so much easier to navigate. So if you have a couple people, it doesn't have to be a lot, but a couple people to rely on, it makes a big difference with handling it. But it doesn't bode well for them if that's already starting with the divisions and the higher level gameplay at 20 people, right?
Yeah. I feel like we're getting some parallels, just kind of like talking this out, and especially with Mark and Liam sitting here. I feel like it is some parallels to Fresh Meat, where the front yard tribe was, kind of jumping right into alliances, where the backyard tribe, fresh off their loss, is just kind of, playing nice, like seeing what's going on, but also in the back of their head, like things are happening. So Liam, based off of the Green Tribe, based off of Vendetta, did you see any like power players that kind of were kicking off those conversations well, that like kind of resonated with what you might have had to experience being on the Cascade Tribe, also in the backyard, also losing the first challenge?
Yeah, backyard. The backyard teams have not had a good start to these 2 seasons. But I think Adrian did a good job, definitely communicating with everybody. Starting that alliance early with Grace, and he's kind of thrown out Drew a couple times, right? He's like, I'm uneasy about him, but I'll form these alliances with these other folks instead, right? As far as like the power players, I mean, I think it was Allie who threw out Chase's name and did the whole, he doesn't really want to be here. And then that kind of started the whole, hey, your name is being thrown in, to the mix. And then went up to Chase and said, hey, your name's being thrown into the mix. You should throw out other names, And so, like, I don't know if that's going to kind of come back to her later on and be like, hey, you guys kind of, or people approaching her and be like, hey, you kind of threw Chase's name out there, But it's early on. So I don't know. I'd say Allie and Adrian kind of had some good power plays at the beginning here for Green.
Yeah. And something a little bit interesting also to talk about is the cast that we had. And I know me, Grace, and Claire talked about that last week in our cast assessment, but kind of seeing everybody in action is a little bit unique because this cast is a very dynamic cast. There's a lot of history between these castaways, but also within the game. So you have a lot of players that, not only are partnered up together for one way or the other, like relationships, siblings, like we were saying. You have a couple of drinking survivor players that played the day-long versions of Grand Rapids. You have the legacy players as well that are coming in with sibling connections. You have Josie connected to Juliana. You have Aubrey connected to Sydney. You have Harry connected to Noah. So Noah, just kind of going off the bat with all of these connections, how would you maybe like navigate that? Is there like a threat at all? Like having like somebody that may have played a game before, or, is a legacy player or has these connections? Like, how would you maybe rank those like threat levels, I guess?
Yeah, I definitely think to me, the most pressing, as like if I'm looking at other people, is like Hannah and Josh, where like they are in a relationship and they're both in the game. So like if they make it to the merge, it's going to be such a challenge to convince one to vote out the other. And so like that, I feel like that would be in the back of my mind kind of at all times when working with Hannah or Josh. So that would be like tier 1 is like, this is kind of the high priority partners. And then next would probably be the connections to the games in the past, just with like having the experience, like with Hannah and Zoe, like they know how to talk the game. They know how to work people. So like having someone who can give you that experience and relay how to do that is, I think, crucial, especially in the early parts of the game. Once you get later in the game, things start to even out, but it's really important early on, like how to set your strategy. And then I would say lastly, kind of like other partnerships that might not be as tight, kind of Eli and Drew, like they didn't really know each other coming in, and it was a little bit more different than the rest of the relationships. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. So let's kind of flip over to Exile Island, where Mark and Noah are all too familiar over there. It was blaring heat over there. The corn crops were basically overlooking you, baking you all back there. Mark, I remember seeing your baseball cap sunburn. That was quite the sight to behold. But again, it looked absolutely incredible. So some of those shots out there were great. So I want to applaud you on the podcast for those. But we had a little bit of an interesting situation happen out there. So Zoe and Chase arrived there, and they immediately get clues to these hidden immunity idols hidden back at their camps. But with these idols, they can only be activated by switching them over to the other tribe. So they were kind of faced with the dilemma of, do we give them to each other? Does Zoe give it to Chase and vice versa? Or do they give them to maybe their partners in the game or even somebody random on the other tribe? So, Mark, how would you kind of watching that all unfold, watching Zoe and Chase kind of navigate what they were going to decide to do? What were you thinking? How would you maybe interact with those circumstances that you were given?
So first, not to change topic, but we've brought it up twice. We would be remiss not to thank Taylor for the amazing flags she put together. Taylor from season 5. They were awesome.
Yes.
Yeah, they were really sick. And I thought the tribes had a lot of fun with those. So thank you, Taylor.
Yeah.
It was cool, obviously, with my previous experience with Zoe, seeing how she handled the clue and everything in this season versus how she did it last time. And that's when you could kind of watching her on the screen and even being there in person, you could tell that she was there to play. Because I think the big twist is that obviously they got to read their clues by themselves and then immediately realize, oh, this is going to benefit someone else, but also could benefit me. And it was interesting how they immediately went back and pinned the target on each other, but also were in the back trying to work with each other. And obviously we saw that Zoe had actually found it. So I'm curious to see what she does from here. Is she planning on playing it for Adrian, giving it to him somehow? Kyle is obviously no longer with us in the game. Not to spoil anything too quick, but so what's she going to do with it? And I think from my perspective too, it's what can I do to make sure that this is not a target on my back? Because you could hear so many people immediately when she goes to exile saying, oh, there's a clue back there too. So I think you have to come back and have to come up with a consistent story that you're willing to believe yourself to the point where other people will trust you with it as well, because that's a huge target for essentially no power if you can't play it for yourself either.
Yeah, it was pretty great to see Zoe get her redemption, kind of right off the bat with finding the idol and utilizing that clue. I thought it was very stealthy of her to fake her confessional and go down to the water well. I think that's using our production to her advantage. I thought that was great of her to do. And so she found it, and now she has to give it to Chase, but Chase didn't have it. Chase didn't look. So that was that's going to be a dilemma for her to be able to overcome. So we'll see how that happens in episode 2 tomorrow. But leading into that, they all sat around in a circle. Zoe did end up lying and telling a story about a slide puzzle. Chase won. He might have gotten a clue, and the whole tribe seemed to kind of buy it. Liam, what would you maybe be thinking if somebody were to come up to you with a story like that? It has to kind of raise some flags in some way, but would you still want to work with that person?
Oh yeah. I don't think I would trust him from the get go. I don't really watch. Last season was the first time I ever watched or participated in Survivor, right? So I was kind of getting the understanding of it all while doing it, but I don't think I would have trusted them from the get go. But yeah, I certainly would have tried to pair up with them and try and get more information. I think you can see that the yellow team made kind of more jokes around it, but believed it a lot more. Whereas on the green side, I think Adrian and Drew both kind of questioned it. They were like, yeah, I don't know if I believe that type of thing. And I think that kind of worked against Chase in a way. But yeah. Zoe, I think, handled it, the right way. But I'd certainly try and pair up with her.
Yeah. So fast forwarding to our immunity challenge, we had a bit of a blowout for this one. Kind of going off what Mark was saying, shout out to John Urbanik from seasons 1 and 4, who has been a blast at making all of these crazy challenges, especially our puzzles, updating our puzzle game so that our people who say that puzzles are their strength have something to do in the challenges. That's great. But yeah, it was a great challenge to have, and our production level has been, I feel like, very, very great this season. And part of that is through the donations that we had to kind of elevate it to that level. So again, for those tuning in, that was a thank you so much for donating, and it was great. And this is only the start, so I'm hoping you all tune in for that. But getting back to the challenge, we see a little bit of it was an interesting back and forth between the challenges. So green was in front at the beginning. Yellow, our vengeance, was kind of pulled ahead at the puzzle. And then right at the end, Carrie couldn't get the lock undone. Noah, what was it like watching your girlfriend struggle with that one?
Yeah, I remember since I was filming, I was standing right there and I could see it. Just like once Tyler got the lock, my heart just sank. I was like, this is usually how it goes. Like someone just has bad luck in the challenge, and then that is enough for vote one. And that was all I could think of while I watched Tyler run back and they finished the rest of the challenge, because it's so hard to claw out of that. Yeah, it was hard to watch, but thankfully it worked out right.
Yeah, it was a tough thing to edit too, because she didn't give up, especially at the very end. She chugged back and just was too late with that. So the challenge was a big back and forth. I wanted to note, I don't know if anybody else was paying attention, but this is probably like the third or fourth time I've seen this episode. Actually, that's a lie. I've seen it way more than that. But one of the things that I kind of noticed was how people were approaching these puzzles. So you kind of see on the green tribe, Drew was just kind of jogging along Aubrey. Aubrey was putting the puzzle pieces down. He was just supporting her. Meanwhile, on the yellow tribe, they kind of had a dynamic. I saw that Luke was filling out like the first couple pegs, and then Samantha was meanwhile studying the next couple. So it was kind of a nice ebb and flow, and a very unique strategy that I didn't even think of, implementing in this challenge. Liam, as somebody who beasted one of our infamous challenges from last season, how do you think like this evolution of players are going to like kind of take on these challenges? And what was it like kind of seeing this challenge one be run and this next, I guess, chapter in Survivor Grand Rapids?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the first like kind of puzzle or the first real challenge has a mix of everything, right? And it kind of it lets people go, oh, hey, I'm going to volunteer for this. I'll volunteer for this. This is where I'm good at, right? So it kind of puts people to the test from the get-go, And I think I'm excited for what the puzzles are going to end up, as the season goes on. And for those people that say, oh, I'm really good at puzzles, right? Like to kind of test them out and see where it goes. Mm-hmm. But I think it also, like, from this challenge in particular, Carrie was the one that said, okay, hey, I'll do it, right? Like, I'll do this lock. And I think sometimes that does go against people, but I think having this lock challenge pretty early on, right, is just kind of cool. I'll do this, but like, hopefully it won't work against me, right? And I think we saw that it didn't really have any effect for her, right? Or against her in that case.
Yeah, I think it can go one of two ways in our version of Survivor. I feel like people can pinpoint like weak links in challenges, or people can kind of sweep that under the rug and say like, yep, they at least stood up and did the challenge and move forward, and they gave it a go, and that was good enough for the tribe. And so I think that's kind of what ended up happening with Carrie. And Carrie really kind of pitched her case at the Green Tribe and was letting them know that that she volunteered. She didn't realize like that was the end all be all, and was bummed that it came down to that. And the whole tribe just kind of like chalked it up to luck. Meanwhile, at Yellow Tribe, they are celebrating. They're drinking out of the chalice of victory with Tyler, filling it up and, moving accordingly with that. Mark, what is the vibe, I guess, after winning that first challenge? As somebody who's done so before, like, what is that vibe like coming back to camp? How do you kind of move forward with that?
In my season, we were very consistently winning at the very beginning. And for me, who I'm here to play the strategic game, I'm like eating my brain out because I'm like, I want to go do stuff, but there's nothing to do. And I think you have to use that if in a game like this, where it feels like you're there forever, but you're really like it's 72 hours total. You have to use every second to your benefit. And I think the information you can take from challenges and go from there will really benefit you, because challenges are really a place where contestants have their guard down, and will really like open up in ways that you wouldn't expect. And I think the people that are able to take that, even in a winning situation, go back to the people that they feel like they're close with and kind of start pointing things out to throw, not put names out there necessarily, but kind of like set up bigger targets than you, I think are the people that like in that downtime where you can really start having those conversations. So later on, you can set yourself up too.
Yeah.
So I think that a couple of them, it was obviously a little bit of a rowdy bunch too, but you could see how they genuinely reacted in those situations. And it was really telling who were the people who felt comfortable and who were the people who were thinking as well.
Yeah, I think Eli kind of stood out for that. Eli's brain was moving right away. I think he noted that, they keep winning, but a lot of downtime with the strategy. Not a lot of people are, moving, and you kind of get a little bit stir crazy. And speaking of stir crazy, I mean, Zoe has to kind of figure out like how to navigate Chase not having the idol. It wasn't really shown on camera. I tried to kind of get an inside look, but Zoe and Chase had this brief kind of interaction that Chase didn't have the idol. And so Zoe has to come back to camp and figure out, just wait to see if Chase is actually voted out and kind of develop the plan. So I feel like just looking from Zoe's POV, it's got to be kind of nerve wracking, just like sitting there and thinking about, what her next move is going to be without really knowing about it. So moving back over to the Vendetta tribe, we kind of spoke on it a little bit earlier. Allie ends up throwing out Chase's name based on out-of-game information that was not really provided in-game. It was game information, which kind of threw Chase under the bus. Chase was told that he did not want to be there. Noah, coming from season 1, where we had 4 volunteers in a row from the Green Tribe, how quickly do you pounce on somebody that does not want to be there?
Especially on the first vote, it's what you have to do. As long as it's not you that everyone's writing down, I feel like it's an easy way to just start the game and get things moving. It's so hard to rip that Band-Aid off, so to speak, of like that first vote. You feel terrible, like you want to be friends with everybody, but as the game starts to go, you don't feel that anymore as you start putting pen to paper. So it's that first one is that like ice bath shock of like, all right, this is kind of the new normal. But yeah, like you said, if you can get that first one out of the way, whether it's a volunteer for me, I appreciated it. I didn't say no, but with this first vote, you could kind of tell like once Chase's name was out there, so many people were just like, all right, sounds good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it was interesting to kind of see like how that like formulated. So Drew, I believe, made a comment about how he didn't want to make any plans. He didn't want to like throw anybody's name out there. But once something was thrown out, he pounced on it and he tried to push that as much as possible. And we saw a couple clips of that. But then we kind of saw a counter movement of like Grace and Adrian trying to formulate a counter vote to go for Drew. Liam, when you're in that situation, like right off the bat, round 1, and everybody's kind of going on this unanimous vote train, but it might not be the best move for your game. Like, do you go for that big move, like right off the bat and kind of stir the pot, or like, do you do what they did and sit back a little bit? Like, how would you navigate, like, if a big move was put to you on a platter, like round 1?
I don't know. I mean, I tried to do it last season, right? I think we had Taylor, who was just like, hey, cool, we'll vote. Everybody vote her out, right? Like, she kind of volunteered, I believe. And then I think from that first challenge, like, I kept saying it. I was like, I'm not voting. I've never said Hannah's name, right? But then turns out I was trying to get Hannah to go out last season, right? And so I was trying to be like, hey, okay, next person up, maybe it's this, right? I think it's a decent strategy, right? Like, by Adrian and Grace kind of going, hey, I think, let's float this person's name out there. But we'll kind of say to the group, we'll align with the group at the end of the day and kind of vote out the same person, whether or not it's to your Like if you're trying to partner with that person, depending on how close you are, I feel like early on trying to go with the group, not to isolate yourself, makes the most sense, right? You don't want to be the one that's really trying to challenge everybody and stir the pot more. Depends if you're going for chaos or you're trying to win, but everybody loves chaos too.
It seemed to be a tough spot, especially for the Grand Rapids folks, because Chase was a Grand Rapids local. That was his connection to Sam. But the people that, resided in Grand Rapids, that this was like their backyard, and you all were coming to it. And meanwhile, on the other tribe, Tyler was pushing that Grand Rapids agenda. This was one less number for them. And it was kind of, interesting to see how quickly everybody was okay with letting that go. I think pointing out John specifically on that tribe, John was almost nervous that it was a little too easy, and that he was nervous that, Hannah might be, trying to save Chase a little too much, and that his name was on the line. So, Mark, when you're looking at this game and you're seeing who somebody is trying to save, how big of an indicator to you is that, like, bond, in the game? Like, does it almost overvalue your relationship to that person?
Yes and no. I think if they're trying to save someone, it's something from, as me, the survivor nerd, you have to think of like all the contestants who say you have to think of all of your opponent's best move. And you kind of have to put yourself in their shoes as for why is this person valuable to them. I think something that's kind of underrated that happened in this episode is that, yes, Allie was the person who threw Chase's name out. And then she, I believe, based off the editing, she's the first person to go to him and say, hey, your name's out there because of this. So it's interesting to see, like, obviously she had second thoughts. I'm not sure exactly what happened there, but it's interesting to see where people put their faith into and where they shift the game in that 15, 20-minute period of chaos where you're trying to set yourself up for success the best. So I think that it's a benefit to know that they're trying to save someone, but especially this early in the game, there could be 50,000 different reasons, and you just kind of have to do what's best for you, setting yourself up for the next 3 rounds.
Yeah, it was a interesting kind of lead up to tribal. It was kind of up in the air, it seemed like, and then when we get to tribal, we get a near unanimous vote for Chase. You have I believe it was 7 votes for Chase, 8 votes for Chase, 1 vote for James, and 1 vote for Grace with an evil face, which we find out in the rolling credits at the end, in the final words of Chase, that it was Drew. So we can see what happens in episode 2, what might come from that. But Noah, seeing somebody that should have been voted out unanimously and seeing a few stray votes in there, what is your thought process, going into, like, if you were to see that kind of come out of the urn?
Yeah, my first thought is just like trying to figure out the math, like who, like, 1 is from Chase, so like it's just a single person, single outlier who wasn't going with the plan, and you start going down the rabbit hole of who was it, who are like the big targets that could have done that, was it a mistake, and then like what was the rationale for it. And from this episode, we haven't gotten anything from the next episode, obviously, but it's not super clear as to the reasoning, so I'm sure it'll come out, but it was a very odd, kind of out of the blue thing that I wasn't expecting, for sure.
Nice. Yeah, well, so that is kind of the gist of all of episode 1. We've given everybody a little bit of behind the scenes, shared all of our thoughts and processes of how you all interpreted the game, as well as, just the happenings and a little bit of insider info. So the only thing that is left to do on our podcast is something that we did last season, where we pick our power players of the week. And how this works is we will each rank one person, starting with who we have as power player number 3 of the week. Then we will go to number 2 and number 1, and everybody will go around in a circle, kind of give our little reason. And those points will be tallied up throughout the season to see who our number 1 power player is at the end of the season. For everybody that is ranked number 3, you will get 1 vote or 1 point. If you are ranked number 2, you will get 3 points. And if you are ranked number 1, you will get 5 points. So a little bit of a rundown of that. brief explanation. This will become a norm on our podcast moving forward. And so I hope everybody has all three ready to go. So just kind of kicking it off. Noah, who did you have as number 3 of the week?
Yes, number 3, I had Tyler coming out, peacocking all over with the jacket, with the rip-off pants or zip-off pants, the fedora. I think coming out with big personalities, it's a bold strategy where if you can make it all the way, you seal yourself as that winner. But it makes it so hard to get there because you have such a long game to play. So I love the personality. I love the showmanship by Tyler. And so I'll put him as 3 because of that.
Nice. All right. What about you, Liam?
For 3, I had Zoe, actually. Just from bouncing back and going to the island, right? And then coming back and having kind of that target as like, hey, you might have this extra information. And yeah, sure, they did win the challenge. But I think she played the whole card like of coming back from the island perfectly, right? Kind of being honest with everybody to a certain extent. And her just kind of navigating that whole thing on your head. So I'm interested to see how she does in the second episode.
Solid. What about you, Mark?
Not to toot Noah's horn, but I did put Carrie in my 3. I think it was very well documented from the Green tribe that like nobody wanted to throw a name out. And in that situation, it's so easy to point at the person who, like, whether it be her fault or not, really lost the challenge. I don't think it was her fault, but I think her strategic relationship building must have been very strong. I think you see her, you don't hear a lot from her, but you see her in a lot of important conversations. And I think that's something where you can tell early on she's setting herself up for success.
Nice.
I wish I could take credit for that, Mark.
I had Carrie as an honorable mention. She was just made my cut, kind of for the same reasons that Mark described. Was able to scratch that vote after a lukewarm performance at the first challenge. I actually have Hannah as my number 3. And the reason being is I think Hannah came in with just as big of a target as Zoe did for playing before, but also almost a little bit bigger because she has a 10-year relationship with Josh in the game. And that's kind of almost a big red flag. Not only did her tribe not vote her out at the very beginning, but she wasn't even talked about in this first round of voting people out. She was trying to figure out a way to save face by either pinpointing Drew and kind of spreading that with other people. And I think Hannah, especially, we didn't really talk about it much this podcast. I think she's here to play, and I think she's here kind of for redemption. And I think at least she's on a good path for episode 1. So I'm giving it to Hannah on that one. For number 2, I gave it to the other returnee, Zoe. So kind of along the same lines that Liam had. Zoe was voted out first, and she, took advantage of exile to the most of her ability. She recognized that she would be the first person voted out if her tribe were able to vote somebody out right away. And she found that idol as soon as possible, kind of played production and told everybody she was doing her confessional, found that idol, went up back to camp, acted like nothing happened, and called it a day. She didn't get that idol back from Chase, but it was okay. She's holding it for now, and I think that might have some power later on. So we'll see how that happens with Zoe, but Zoe's my number 2. Noah, curious on your number 2.
Yeah, so I've got Hannah as my number 2. Similar reasons to what you said. It's a past player, power player with the 10-year relationship with Josh. And I think also to add on top of that, she was extremely good at reading the tribe after the challenge of where everyone was at and was the one to realize, like, hey, this doesn't make sense to get rid of Chase. Like, he's a Grand Rapids guy. He's close with me. Like, I'm not going to stir the pot and, like, cause chaos and then put a target on my back, but I'm going to try and fight to keep him in because I know that would be important for me to stay. So I think that was like how she navigated that as a potential power player was very well done.
Nice. What about you, Liam?
I had Hannah as well because exactly that, kind of coming back as a returning player and, she wasn't the one to go to Exile Island either, right, from the get-go. I think, with her having that 10-year relationship with Josh on the other side, like it definitely is a big threat. But I don't think it's something to, that anybody's really worried about this early on. But coming back after the challenge, after the loss, she was in the know kind of about everybody, right? Like I think she's getting information from everybody, and already people are going to her and being like, hey, let's, I want you on my side, like she's already talking with Adrian, who's already partnered with Grace kind of, and you can already see these alliances forming for her.
Solid. Yeah. Hannah's racking up the points. Mark, are you going to keep the train going?
I am not, unfortunately. I know I'm the curveball, but I am going to keep going in a boring way, not to keep it on Zoe, but Zoe is definitely my number 2. Playing with her last season, seeing her just the first little bit of this season, it seems like a different person where she's more aware, she's making good connections, she's using things strategically. And I think that she is doing a really good job of managing her threat level, because I think it could have gone downhill very quickly. And I think also whoever went to exile, if your tribe loses, you're in a really tough spot. So I think that it's kind of something where things are going to start happening aside from that are going to minimize her threat level a little bit more too from here.
Awesome. Yeah, well, a lot of love for our 2 returnees right off the bat. Before we get to our number 1, I think that's kind of a testament to both our fresh meat season, about how you all came in and elevated that competition. A lot of our players, watched that season, and that's the reason why they were playing this one, because they wanted to be a part of that. And so I think that's a testament to how hard that you guys played in that game, and we're able to kind of see that and kind of juxtapose both Zoe and Hannah's kind of, rough outings in season 1, and see how badly they want, to play the game this season, just like everybody else. And so I think that's important to kind of keep in mind when we're ranking number 1. I think we have a lot of power players this season, and this was definitely tough to narrow down, especially with such a big, hefty episode. For me, that number 1, it was split between 2 people, and I'm going to go with Adrian, because it was split between him and Grace, and I felt like Adrian had more connections, at least established in this round, to even try to start making that move. I think he, even though he didn't go through with the Drew move, I think Adrian established himself very, very well with a lot of connections. He had a great conversation with Aubrey, getting to know her. He's a finesser, so-called, self-proclaimed. And I think that kind of shows with how many people he's having one-on-one conversations with, and how, fluidly he's able to initiate some plans and drop information. So while that Drew plan might not have come to fruition this round, I think he's got enough people's trust to navigate the rest of the game. And the only reason he inched out Grace, and I gave it to Adrian over Grace, was because of those connections that he made. And I felt like Grace maybe needed Chase a little bit more this round than Adrian did. So I think that was kind of where my head went to that. So Adrian's got my number 1. Adrian and Zoe rounding out my top 2. Noah, what do you got for number 1?
Before I get to my number 1, I'll build the suspense. I want to, on behalf of Liam and Mark and everyone else, I'm sure everyone has the same feelings, thank Dom for all the work that he's done putting this together, both with the pregame production, filming, editing, putting on these podcasts. So I just want to make sure that's known kind of each and every time along the way. It's been a lot of work, so I want to make sure that's known.
I appreciate that. And
yeah. Especially this was one thing that I really found enjoyable with the season, is like, you could tell the budget is definitely better. The cameras look better, aside from one that had that little blurry. That's beside the point. But like, the cameras look better, the challenges look better, and then it still has like the down home like laughter and humor, and like the subtitle jokes and the finesser and things like that. So I feel like you've just struck that balance of getting all that in there.
Yeah, I do feel like just to chime in there real quick. It's the flyover, the intro to this season. I was like, wow, okay. Having people walk up and the whole introduction between how people relate. But honestly, just like the first 5 minutes of the intro of the fields, and it actually, looked like people were getting dropped off by a car, hanging out in the woods or hanging out in the fields. I was like, dang, okay, this is actually pretty sick, So it gets me a lot more excited, to kind of continue watching this season and joining in it.
Those were muddy fields too. Let's make sure that's pointed out.
I saw Adrian's white shoes.
People are troopers.
I mean, not only I really appreciate the accolades, and it was such a blast to put on the season, and it was no joke. This was the hardest season that I have ever done, and I wouldn't have been able to do it without my crew, especially my Exile crew that was out baking in the sun, and everybody else that was back at camp that was bringing everything together for me to edit and put on screen. So I really appreciate everybody's love and support for this season, and I'm excited for everybody to tune in, because there was a lot of love and passion kind of put in behind the scenes for this to be on the screen. So I'm really excited for the audience to check it out. But yeah.
Sweet. Okay. Sorry for the tangent. Had to get that out there. Yeah, of course. So for my number one for this past week, she's been on the leaderboards a lot. It has to be Zoe for me. In the span of one episode, she goes to exile, has this huge target on her back, comes back and navigates that conversation perfectly, finds the idol, tries to already trade it with Chase, and he just doesn't have it yet. And it's just like the antithesis of how Chase's game went, where it shows you how challenging exile can be, where you don't have time to get those bombs and you can be out immediately. Or for Zoe, it sets you up for the rest of the game, where you have not a functional idol, but something in your pocket that can use as a fake idol, give it to another person on the other tribe. So that it's a huge advantage for her, and she's in a great spot. So I think she's the power player number one for me.
Nice. Good pick. Liam, what about you?
So I think this one might be pretty out there, but my power player is actually Eli. And the reason being is because I don't think he had too much screen time in talking through his strategies and the connections made, but him being the last one in the rewards challenge, making it, and then being the final one in the elimination as well, and finishing that up, I feel like now a lot of people have a lot of trust in him for his challenge abilities, and this kind of leaves him a lot of room to be like, hey, okay, I can kind of step back a bit and form a lot more of the alliances and kind of work on the social game, right? Because he's proven his worth in the challenge by completing that stuff and getting it done, even with that pressure on his back too. So,
good choice.
Good pick. I think especially in the first round, Eli was very present. It's just really hard when you have that tribe on the front porch, because they don't leave it. They just they only leave to get water. And so I did my best trying to edit around that. But I do feel like a lot of Eli's conversations happened while on the porch, while everybody's talking and while everybody's kind of loud. You see Eli like whispering in the background and forming those bonds. So I think Eli's a good pick. And I do hope that we see a little bit more of his game kind of come to fruition a little bit. So Mark, round us out. Final first pick. Who you got?
So with honorable mention to Aubrey Hickmott, because Sydney will kill me otherwise. I'm just kidding. She did great too. But I would absolutely put Hannah in my number one. Similar to Zoe, I think, like for me as being the one person on this panel who played with her last season, and I talked a little bit about it last season, I kind of prompted the vote for her, because when we were in one of the challenges and we were both sitting out, she was just telling me how she's best friends with 3 or 4 people on the other tribe. And she's using these relationships that she had pre-existing. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to take that and run with it. Whereas in this season, she's like, oh, I'm buddies with Kyle, I'm sorry, not Kyle. I'm buddies with Chase, but I'm willing to cut Chase if it's going to move my game forward. And then she's aligning with people she knows in advance, but also like she talked about how she's got John's vote, and John comes in without a lot of connections. And you can just tell that she's developing relationships outside of relying on the people she knows. And I think the best way that she could go into managing the early game with the threat of having Josh on the other side is being willing to develop those other relationships to start too. So I think she learned a lot, and I think she set herself up for a leadership position subtly as well.
Going into the game, Hannah made a note, and I'm not sure if it was made in any of the pregame material that I had put out, But Hannah made a note that she kind of was a little bit more reserved, like in her first game. She didn't really want to step on people's toes. And this season, she was okay with doing so. She also made a note that she wanted to model her game off of Juliana. We'll see if that actually happens, but noted that Juliana's ability to build relationships outside of what like her comfortability level was like kind of a big thing. And I think Hannah has done a pretty good job thus far, especially in round one, at building these genuine relationships that are a little bit more relationship first and then game second, so that when you lose and then you come back, you can connect with those people right away. I think Hannah did a really good job of that. I think we're all kind of on the same page with that, with our top people, barring some people in and out of it. But I will tally all of that up because I'm not good at doing mental math at all, and post all of our points on Instagram and see where everybody is at. I think there is a strong case to be made for why everybody that played, or most everybody that was on episode one, to be in this top three on anybody's list. And so I think it just kind of goes to say how tough this season is. So wrapping up with everything, it has been an absolute blast to sit down for boys night and go over episode one. It has been a blast to see our community grow, both with within the game with our 18 new castaways, behind the scenes, seeing how much money we raised to put all of this on. And we are at just over 1.1K views. So that is insane. I have never had a premiere blow up like that within a weekend. So for all of those tuning in, I really, really appreciate it. And tomorrow, I hope you tune in at 7 o'clock to see episode 2 and everything come to, the next episode come out and go from there. I don't know. I'm fumbling on my words a little bit.
Nailed it.
It's been just over a year since I've podcast and do a sign off. But Noah, Liam, Mark, I really appreciate your time today and going through everything. I'm sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dom.
Yeah, of course. I'm sure we'll see you all pop in here and there as we go through the rest of the season and recap those. But until then, it is Dom, aka Jeff, signing off, and we will see you on your TV screens or laptops or iPhones or however you watch our episodes tomorrow night, Wednesday at 7 p.m. I will see you there. Have a good night. Head back to camp.